Welcome to this week's edition of Markey Talks With. There is a war in Eastern Europe. To be more specific, there is a war in Ukraine and the Donbass region, or independent Donbass region of Ukraine. The NATO narrative on this war is that Russian forces are attacking Ukrainian forces on Ukrainian territory. The Russian narrative is that the independent people of the Donbass region have declared independence and that they are being attacked by Ukrainian forces and are defending themselves. I'm joined today by Dean O'Brien, who is a journalist and a photographer who has spent some time in the Donbass region of Ukraine, has sent off reports to us from there, I mean the public, and is in constant links since he came back to the UK with other people in the Ukraine. And I think that of all of the people that have been watching on Twitter that are recording what's happening in Ukraine, I think Dean O'Brien is one of those guys who's not afraid to contradict that NATO narrative of what's happening. Dean O'Brien, thanks for joining us this evening.
Thanks for the invite. Thank you.
No problem at all. Dean, can I firstly ask you, how did you get involved in Donbass in the Ukraine?
Well, initially about 10 years ago, I was traveling to Ukraine. It was a great place to visit, and I went there because I was interested in social change. So you were visiting a country that was kind of like the Soviet Union. They'd still got Lenin monuments, they got the hammer and sickle on buildings, factories. And I was kind of looking at how you'd got this blending in with newly built McDonald's that were being built. So you've got kind of like this shift that I was witnessing. And I was a photographer. I was at university at the time. And obviously I was watching this shift happen, and I was doing various photography projects on people, on the surroundings, on the Soviet history. Then in 2014, there was political upheaval. The legally elected government in Ukraine was overthrown. This was something that was supported by the US, as they do. You know, this was a coup. It's something that's not unusual to them. It's something that happens at other countries, not this one, not just this one. The legally elected government was overthrown with the power of the far right. You had the help of Corpus, Pravi sector or right sector, loads of neo-Nazis, and they helped to overthrow the government. What happened is the people in the East, who have always kind of leaned more towards, dare say, their Russian heritage, objected to this because they said, like, this is a legally elected government that's been overthrown. We're not going to recognise whatever's being thrown in there. This is where it started. There was upheaval in the East. They took over some government buildings, and Ukraine sent tanks and soldiers over there. And this is where we're at today. It went from a civil war to what we've got now, 7 going into 8 years now of conflict. Almost 14,000 people killed.
Just before we actually get into those details,
yeah.
After the coup, the fake revolution as it was, and I remember distinctly there was a lot of pro-EU effort.
Yeah, there was.
Went in there as well. We might link into that soon enough. Did you expect that when you went back over there and you saw all these changes? Had you been expecting this? Did this come as an uber culture shock to you? How did you feel about all of this?
Well, when I'd been traveling there, even before this, I think it's the only place in Eastern Europe where you can go and see swastikas openly on the streets. You know, you've got the police directing traffic, and they've got big swastika tattoos on their arm, and they're just directing traffic, and people aren't batting an eyelid. Ukraine have a terrible history with Nazism, and it's quite freely on display, if you like. They still have parades every year, torchlight parades, where they remember the Galician SS. I think it's the 22nd Division of, and they all wear the uniforms. They drive the staff cars on this parade. It's absolutely madness. You don't expect this anywhere in Europe. So once you see the amount of influence and power the far right had got there, when this happened, that was music to their ears, and they were the muscle. They were the muscle to overthrow the government. So they were needed. And obviously now this is where we're at. You've got Azov Battalion, who are still part of the Ukrainian forces. They use a wolf's hook symbol. So instead of using a swastika, they use the runic symbols, which your average person on the street may not know what they are, but anybody that knows anything about politics knows what these symbols represent, and they're openly on display on flags, banners. So when the coup happened, it never came as any surprise. It had been bubbling away for a long time.
Okay, and so let's just tie this down to confirm. You know, we hear far right thrown out left, right, and centre in Ireland and the UK and even in the United States for anybody who objects to the establishment or objects to a particular narrative these days. But when we're talking about Ukraine, we're talking about real, genuine, authentic fascists.
Oh, do you know, I've witnessed the parades. We're talking torchlight parades where they're holding these Roman torches in flames, and you've got thousands of people marching. I'm not talking about some group of 20 or 30 skinheads like you might find if there's a concert in a local city where you might get a gathering of a few right-wingers that are there overnight. I'm talking thousands marching the streets, and this is the norm. Nobody's batting an eyelid. I can remember when I was taking photographs and people were looking at me as if to say, "What are you taking pictures for?" You would not believe that you were on the streets of Europe. You just wouldn't believe it.
Okay, and so moving towards the east of Ukraine, the Donbass region, the people there were not prepared to accept this, you say, and they, what did they do?
What happened was they overtook government buildings and they were demanding kind of like an election, an official election, or kind of like a referendum. And they in the end, what happened was, because of the soldiers being sent in, they cut their losses and said, "I tell you what, we'll have independence." And that was what happened. You're on mute again.
Sorry, there was a plebiscite, I believe, Dean.
There was what, sorry?
A plebiscite. They had a vote on it. It wasn't just a clique that took over Donbass. They did vote on it.
They did vote on independence, yeah. So this is where we're at today. Obviously, they've got sanctions against them. It's not the easiest place to operate. And as a Westerner, when you go there, you can't use a credit card because they've got no electronic financial facilities. You can't use your SIM card there because of sanctions. So you have to have a local SIM. So, but they're doing fine, you know, as an independence, and have said they will not return back to Ukraine. But there's been too much blood loss.
The images that you captured from Ukraine are very, very powerful, from the Donbass region, I should say, are very, very powerful images. And oftentimes they're violent images, or they're images capturing the end result of military assaults in local inhabited regions. Could you tell us about the actual conflict that's happening there now?
I'll tell you what's happening. You've got Ukrainian forces that are using drones now. They're using drones. Some of them are modified ones, like they're kind of ones that you might see, domestic ones made by a company called DJI. They've got the Mavics, that kind of thing. They're being modified to drop explosives. And they're being dropped in civilian areas on parks. They're going through the roofs of people's houses. And when I went out there, I thought, you know what? You're being told this is propaganda by Russia. I didn't see any Russian soldiers out there. These guys are in camouflage uniforms and they're fighting in Crocs. You know, they've got no proper military boots.
When you say these guys, just to confirm, Dean, we're talking about the Donbass independent region, their forces, their military,
they're local militia forces, yeah. So each village might have a local volunteers who are defending that region, really. And they're in like kind of uniforms that have been put together, mismatched camouflage, are fighting in Crocs and trainers. These aren't Russian forces. But it seems to be easy for the West to say, oh, the Russian army are in there. I think we both know if the Russian army were there, they would have finished off the Ukrainian army a very long time ago. These local people are fighting against Western-backed forces now. The Americans are there, the British are there. They're not putting ground troops on the ground fighting, but they are training Ukrainian forces.
And they're also providing, we know from the attempted impeachment of Donald Trump in relation to his alleged attempt at influencing the Prime Minister of Ukraine at one time. We know that there are arms deals that are spoken about as though it's some kind of aid, but in essence, it's arms loans to the Ukraine, isn't that right?
Yeah, America has sent over, I mean, last time I went to Ukraine was 2018, and I went there, and even then they had Humvees there. They've got the American Humvees in the tan colour. They've got all the American vehicles. They've got a lot of support from America, a lot of military support there,
and a lot of moral support from the EU.
Of course, yeah.
Okay. In terms of the situation right now, Dean, in Donbass, has there been any significant strategic change, any territorial change, or is it a bit like World War I, all stuck on the borderlines, as it were, no movement, no change, but constant threat? Or how are things there for people now?
It's pretty much a checkmate situation now. Everyone's firmly dug in. There's no mass changes in land. Nobody's grabbing anything. They're pretty much permanently where they are now. It's a checkmate situation. They're shelling most days from Ukrainians. In fact, it's almost all days they're hitting villages. They're trying to drive people out of their properties, particularly near the airport region. There's a place called Stratinovta Street. There row and row of abandoned houses, and you get the odd old lady that lives there. Now, what often you hear people say is, why don't they move away? Well, my answer is this. Number one, why should they? Number two, you're talking about people that are in the 70s and 80s that lived in villages. They live off the land. They grow their own potatoes, corn, everything. You can't go and take one of them people and put them in a city. And if you did put them in the center of Kiev, where it's full of millionaires and billionaires, what are they going to do? Are they going to beg in subways? So it's not a realistic option to say these people...
I think shelling them with the specific intention and purpose of them moving away is actually officially genocide, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And this is it. And this is the problem why they have an issue with the Western media. They denied press accreditation to the BBC for numerous years on end, because when they went there initially, they did write quite a lot of bad things about the people there. They were fairly biased. They didn't cover both sides of the conflict.
It's the BBC, come on.
Exactly. So this is why they're more prone to allow freelance journalists in. They just want you to come in with an open mind. You know, don't take one side, don't take the other. As soon as I got into Donbass, I was allowed to roam freely around the city. You have got a curfew there. I think it's from about 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. That was due to assassinations and attacks that have been happening. But you get used to that. But,
can I ask you, from the point of view of the ordinary people of the region, you spend some time with them.
Yeah.
In a very human and base way. How is this affecting them? Do they have a constant anxiety because of these attacks? Just how is it affecting their inner self, their core self on a day-to-day basis?
They're used to it now. I remember when I was in Donetsk city, the city centre, and as soon as you get to around about, as it just starts getting dark, you can all of a sudden hear a boom in the distance, and it's people still play chess on the park benches, and they look up and the grandmothers curse at the sky. Me as a Westerner, it's the first time I think I'd ever heard bombing, really, genuine bombing. And the first thing I thought was, is that incoming or outgoing? You don't know. They can tell you by the amount of seconds in between each one, how many kilometres it is away. These are even the old people, they were telling me. So, but they're used to it. But a lot of them have said they didn't think they'd ever witness another war, not after World War II.
But even getting used to it, Dean, if you have children, for instance, and you hear an explosion and they're not within eyesight to you, the anxiety and worry, where are the kids, what's coming, you know, as much as people can get used to it, it can also develop a permanent sense of anxiety within people as well, you know.
Oh yeah, they've got that for sure. But again, coming back to the children, this is why they've said they'd never go back to Ukraine again. Too many children have been lost. Yeah. They've got monuments there to names of loads of children that have died in certain villages and cities. They've said just on principle alone, they would never, ever go back to Ukrainian government control again.
And then there are children who maybe 8-year-olds who have known nothing else.
Exactly. They're the real children of war. They've grown up around this. They've grown up knowing that they have to live in a basement sometimes for days on end.
Coming back to the UK, as you have done, do you have any sense, just from the general media, that there's a war in Eastern Europe at the moment?
No, you never read about it. I'm constantly telling people, you know, when I tell them I've been to a conflict zone and they automatically think the Middle East. You tell them there's a war in Europe, you know, 3.5 hours away on a flight, and you have to explain to them all what's happening. And even then, they have to check with other people and say, is he right, what he's on about? They don't know because it's never there. very rarely do you see it, and you have to look for it. If you typed in Ukraine on some sort of news search, you'll find something, but it's just never reported on.
Okay, Dean, your assessment, because even though you're in the UK, you're receiving a constant feed of data and information back from the Donbass region. Your assessment of the future?
Do you know, I'm constantly pushing for, they need to talk. The president they've got at the moment, Zelensky, won't talk, the Ukrainian president, okay? So what we're hoping for is a change. Next president will talk. The leaders in Donbass, in the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, have said they're ready to talk anytime, to sit down and get a peace agreement. This is what they need. The Ukrainian government won't talk, and that is the issue. That is
I think it might be less likely that they'll talk now, because I won't say Biden, I'm not sure how much control Biden actually has, but Biden's administration seems to have come out of the box with some intensity in relation to their global project. So I think Trump and that had chilled out on everything internationally except South America and Latin America, particularly Venezuela. But Biden seems to be going the whole hog now, whether it's the Mideast, South Latin America, and Russia, and Russia baiting. So I'm not sure personally what chance there is. Might have been more chance of peace under Trump. Not that I'm a Trump supporter, but under Trump there might have been more chance of talks. Do you think my assessment is off the wall, or there might be something in it?
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. Yeah. To get towards the end of Trump's days, I think he was kind of like backing out on Ukraine a little bit. I think he's realised it was just a bottomless pit. And I just, what's happened now with Biden, it's just intensified. You know, it's just got worse. But the only way they're going to do it is by getting a peace agreement. The people of Donbass were hoping to merge with Russia if Putin would take them in. But to be honest, I think if that was going to happen, it would have happened by now. I could be wrong.
I think the Russians are too clever for that, I suppose. Cute hairs, as we say here in Ireland, from the point of view that they are surrounded by US troops and forces at the moment, quite literally, and that might be a move too much for them. I think they're being seen as an administration with a lot of control, self-control, and I'm not sure that they would step any further with the Ukraine. I could be wrong with that. Dean O'Brien, thanks for joining us today. If people want to follow your work and keep in contact with you and keep in contact with what's happening in the Donbass region, how would they go about doing that?
It's on Twitter mainly. So my Twitter handle is @DinoBino1. Or if you just type in Dean O'Brien on Twitter and just put Donbass or Donetsk, I'm sure some of my tweets will come up. I think I'm about the only person that's tweeting in English at the moment.
Right, yeah. Well, as I say, you're one of the only ones that are doing it, and I've been following you for a while. And I think it's brave to be contradicting the Western narrative, the NATO narrative, especially when you're in one of the fundamental NATO countries. It's a brave step to take. You're not going to get any work with the Washington Post anytime soon.
Oh no, yeah.
You know, listen, Dean, thanks for joining us today. I hope you join us again soon, and stay safe wherever you are.
All right, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean.
Bye-bye.